5 seconds of doctored audio nearly destroyed Jasmine Crockett's career in a federal courtroom. But within just 5 minutes, she made Chief Justice John Roberts declare, "I've misunderstood this law for 30 years. If justice can be manipulated that easily, how many innocent people have already been convicted because of a single edited clip?" Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The cold stabbed through the marble steps like a warning. Reporters had been outside since dawn. Inside, every seat was taken. Senators, aides, press. They didn't come for justice. They came to watch Jasmine Crockett fall. And then, heels, measured, steady. She entered alone, no staff, no entourage. Just one folder and eyes that didn't blink. She didn't look at anyone, didn't smile. Every step said, "I'm not here to ask permission." People watched, waiting for her to break. She didn't. She sat like she belonged there more than any of them. Like she'd come not to defend, but to expose. Then the doors opened. Silence fell. Chief Justice John Roberts entered, robes sweeping, eyes sharp. He moved like power personified. His gaze found Jasmine, held it, and then the first strike. "Ms. Crockett, let's be clear. This is a courtroom, not your press room." Laughter followed. Quiet, cutting. A few smirks, a few stifled chuckles. It was meant to rattle her. It didn't. She stayed still, eyes forward. Because silence in the right hands is not surrender. It's strategy. The judge's nod was barely perceptible, but to Elliot Drayton, it was a curtain rising. He stood with practiced ease, shoulders squared, jacket smooth, voice locked and ready. He didn't raise his volume. He didn't need to. His authority came not from force, but from precision. "Members of the jury," he began, walking toward them with slow, deliberate steps. "What you're about to hear may sound like politics, but it's not. This case isn't about debate or disagreement. It's about boundaries and what happens when a public official crosses them." His fingers held up a single page, the text enlarged in bold type. "On February 15th, during a televised White House press briefing, Ms. Jasmine Crockett said, 'Our northern trade rivals are on their knees thanks to President Trump's tariff brilliance.'" He let it land. The silence afterward wasn't just polite, it was loaded. "That's not neutral analysis," he continued. "That's not government transparency. That is praise packaged as policy, and it was delivered on the American taxpayer's dime." He turned slightly, pacing now. Not nervously, but like someone laying the final tiles of a trap. "Now, the Hatch Act doesn't ban federal employees from speaking," he explained, his tone tightening. "It bans them from campaigning while acting in their official capacity, from using their position to influence elections or promote specific political figures. That line between service and partisanship is sacred. And when someone speaks from the White House podium with that kind of language, they're not just breaking protocol, they're breaking the law." He placed the transcript on the evidence table, his movements controlled, as if setting down a weapon. "But that's not the full picture," he added, glancing toward the judge. "Not even close." A shift in tone, a shift in posture. He stepped back to his table and opened a locked silver case. "This morning," he said, drawing breath, "my office received additional material, a short audio recording, submitted by an anonymous source. We have not yet verified its technical origin, but its content, well, let's just say it speaks louder than any document ever could." The courtroom tensed. Jurors leaned forward. Even the judge narrowed his gaze. Drayton held up the flash drive between his fingers, like a loaded round. "The voice you're about to hear is unmistakably Ms. Crockett's, captured off microphone, seconds after the same briefing. No teleprompters, no press agents, just her, unfiltered." He crossed the room, inserted the drive into the courtroom laptop, and stood back. The screen flickered. Static burst from the speakers. Then her voice, calm, low, and devastatingly clear. "They deserve it. Anyone against America deserves what's coming." It was 5 seconds long, but it hit like a detonation. One juror exhaled through clenched teeth. Another scribbled something hastily. A whisper spread from the back of the gallery to the front like a slow rising wind. Even a seasoned congressional reporter flinched, glancing toward the defense table with eyebrows raised. Drayton stood still, letting the silence crawl. Then, without looking away from the jury, he said, "That was not analysis. That was not context. That was retribution. It wasn't said to inform. It was said to punish." He let the words hang like smoke. When a federal official, speaking with the full weight of the U.S. government behind her, declares that dissent deserves consequences, that's no longer public communication. That's weaponized speech. He turned slightly, his voice sharpening. She wasn't targeting a policy. She was targeting people, Americans, foreign allies, journalists, lawmakers, anyone she disagreed with. He pointed to the screen, still paused on the waveform of her voice. And she didn't say it in a moment of passion. She said it in a moment of privacy, when she thought no one was listening, but someone was. By now, the courtroom was no longer reacting. It was reeling. The press gallery had gone from quiet note-taking to frantic messaging. The jurors sat back, some arms folded, others stunned still. Drayton saw it. He stepped forward again, voice now just above a whisper. "This is exactly why the Hatch Act exists. Not just to prevent slogans at press briefings, but to stop power from becoming permission. To protect the American people from the slow erosion of law into personal agenda." He turned once more to face the bench. "Your Honor, we recognize that anonymous submissions must be scrutinized. But the court heard what we heard. 5 seconds, 5 words, and a window into intent that no transcript could ever show." His tone dropped further. "And now the question isn't whether Ms. Crockett violated a statute. It's whether this courtroom is willing to pretend she didn't." And across the aisle, Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly still. Eyes forward, no fidgeting, no outrage. But behind that silence was something stronger than anger. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't shaken. She had expected this exact moment, every ounce of it, because she knew truth can be manipulated, but doubt only needs one seed to grow. The prosecutor's words still echoed when the judge looked toward the defense table and said, "Ms. Crockett, you may respond." It was a loaded invitation, and everyone knew it. The gallery was leaning forward, jurors still processing the 5-second clip, and even the court stenographer had paused her typing for a breath. All eyes were on Jasmine, but she didn't move right away. She remained seated, her fingers gently resting on the leather folder in front of her, as if she were waiting for the noise to settle in people's heads before speaking into the silence that would follow. Then, without urgency, she rose. No flinch, no tight jaw. Just calm, controlled. She picked up the folder and walked toward the center like a woman crossing a battlefield, not a courtroom. Every step echoed like punctuation. She stopped. The folder remained closed in her hands. Her eyes swept once, only once, across the jury, then straight to the judge. Her voice, when it came, was even, clear, sharper than anything said that morning. "If this were a performance," she said, pausing between each word, "I would congratulate the prosecution." The words hung in the air, razor-edged. A few heads in the gallery turned sharply. Because what Mr. Drayton just gave us was a master class in theatrical storytelling. She looked down briefly, then back up. But unfortunately for him, this isn't theater. This is a court of law. The tension snapped. The room shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Something had changed. The mockery from earlier? Gone. The smirks? Faded. Because now she had the floor, and no one was laughing. She let that silence stretch just long enough to seize control of the tempo. "We're not here to review a script. We're here to examine facts, context, law." She raised the folder slightly, not for drama, but as a quiet declaration of readiness. "And while the prosecution is busy playing audio clips without timestamps, submitted by someone we can't identify, I've brought receipts, verified, documented, auditable." Her gaze moved to the jury again. "You've been asked to react to 5 seconds. I'll be asking you to understand 5 years of public service, of process, and of law that actually matters." She placed the folder on the evidence table, opened it with precise fingers, and pulled out a page. Not shaking, not defensive, just surgical. Every person in that courtroom could feel it now. She wasn't scrambling. She wasn't cornered. She was prepared. The calm wasn't just confidence, it was conviction. She didn't come to explain herself. She came to dismantle an accusation built on fragments and show the difference between speculation and proof. The air had changed, not in volume, but in weight. And for the first time that morning, the question wasn't what she had said. It was whether the court had ever truly been ready to hear her at all. Jasmine didn't move immediately after placing the folder on the table. She let the air settle again, made the courtroom lean into the silence, not away from it. Then with quiet precision, she picked up the first page from her file and held it up for the jury to see. "Let's stop dancing around what this case is supposedly about," she said, her voice steady, unshaken. "Let's go directly to the source." At the top of the page in bold letters were the words, Hatch Act of 1939. She turned slightly toward the jury. "This is the law the prosecution believes I violated. So let's read it. Not interpret it, not spin it, not dramatize it. Just read it." She took one step closer to the jury box, held the page at chest level, and began. Section 5.2 of the Hatch Act states, "An employee may not use their official authority or influence for the purpose of interfering with or affecting the result of an election." Her tone was slow and surgical. "And that's it. That's the rule. The entire case hinges on whether or not I cross this line." She lowered the page, looked each juror in the eye, not to pressure them, but to tether the moment to reality. "So ask yourselves, did anything I said, on camera, on the record, encourage a vote, ask for a donation, support a candidate for elected office?" She shook her head once gently. "No. What I gave that day was a factual update on the results of a trade policy, not a campaign speech, not an endorsement, just a policy report." She returned to the table and laid out a second sheet. "This is the full transcript of that press briefing, every word, every question, every answer." She didn't wave it for effect. She simply pointed. "No edits, no anonymous clips, no mystery flash drives, just the complete, verifiable truth." She slid the page closer to the jury. "You won't find any slogans here. You won't find any electioneering. What you will find is data, summarized and delivered in accordance with my responsibility as a federal communications officer." Her tone tightened slightly. "But somehow that duty has now been twisted into something criminal. Because I didn't stutter, because I spoke clearly, because I didn't dilute the facts for someone else's comfort." Now the silence was different. It wasn't uncertain. It was contemplative. People were thinking, recalculating. Jasmine could feel it. She didn't let up. "The prosecution wants you to believe that I violated the Hatch Act because I said our northern trade rivals were struggling. They called it promotional. I call it factual. At the time of that briefing, the Department of Commerce had already published a report showing a measurable decline in northern trade surplus due to tariff adjustments. That's public information. That's what I was referring to." She tapped the document once, softly. "If we criminalize federal employees for referencing accurate government data in briefings, we don't just silence voices, we sabotage transparency." She paused, not for effect, but to let it land. Then she lifted one final sheet from her folder. "And since the prosecution wants to reduce this trial to 5 seconds of audio," she said, locking eyes with the jury, "let me give you the entire sentence they clipped." She cleared her throat and read directly from the official transcript. "Some might say they deserve the consequences of opposing our trade policy, but our job is to lead, not to gloat." She looked back up. "That's the quote. Full stop. That's what I actually said. They played 5 words. They deserve it. Anyone against America deserves what's coming." And they stopped right before the point, right before the part where I called for restraint, not retribution, for leadership, not arrogance. "Now let's address the real reason this case exists," she said, eyes locking on to the prosecution table. "It's not because I praised a sitting president. It's not because I violated election law. It's because I'm not the kind of spokesperson they expected to speak with authority. Because when someone like me stands at that podium and speaks plainly, it makes the wrong people uncomfortable. And instead of challenging my facts, they questioned my right to speak them." Her voice didn't tremble. It sharpened. But the Hatch Act wasn't written to police discomfort. It was written to protect the democratic process. And I did nothing to interfere with it. She turned slightly, now addressing not just the jury, but the whole room. There was no call to vote, no political fundraising, no partisan language. I didn't use my position to sway an election. I used it to report results. She gestured calmly to the folder. The courtroom was still caught in the silence Jasmine had created. A different kind of silence this time. Not one of doubt, but of discomfort. Controlled discomfort. She saw it, and she stepped right into it. And now, she began, her voice lower, calmer, but with a new kind of pressure behind it. Let's deal with the so-called centerpiece of this prosecution, the 5-second audio clip. She took a few slow steps forward, but not toward the jury this time, toward the bench. The anonymous recording that came in on a flash drive slipped under someone's door in a manila envelope like it was part of a thriller novel. She paused, tilted her head slightly. Tell me, Your Honor, are we supposed to accept that? No one breathed, not even the judge. Jasmine reached for the flash drive, now resting on the evidence table, holding it up between her fingers like it was contaminated. Let me walk you through what we don't know about this file. We don't know who recorded it. We don't know when it was recorded. We don't know what device was used or whether the clip was spliced, looped, or manipulated. There's no metadata, no raw file, no forensic verification, and, most importantly, no chain of custody. She let those last 4 words drop like iron. She turned now, slowly, toward the jury. If I handed you a random envelope on the street with 5 words clipped from someone's voicemail and told you it was proof of a crime, would you convict them? Would you send them to prison because an unnamed stranger told you to believe it? Her tone never wavered, because that's what's being asked of you now, to ignore everything else, transcripts, context, public record, and trust a ghost in the system. Then she pivoted back to Roberts. The shift in energy was sharp, like a cold wind through marble. Your Honor, she said, voice steady but unmistakably direct. If this court accepts that file, without source, without verification, without even an affidavit of origin, then we are not adjudicating law anymore. Her words cut clean, precise. We are validating hearsay, institutionalizing manipulation, and opening the door to a precedent that will haunt every courtroom that follows this one. The judge stared down at her, but she didn't blink. This isn't just about me, she continued. This is about whether truth can still survive in a room where proof is optional. About whether we still have a justice system or just a performance system where whatever creates the best headline becomes admissible reality. She lifted the flash drive again, then laid it down slowly in front of the bench. Because if this becomes your evidence standard, then anyone can be destroyed by 5 seconds of audio in a well-timed leak. And no one, not me, not you, not anyone, will be safe from that precedent. She took a single step closer. And that's why, she said, firm, unwavering, eyes locked with the Chief Justice, if we accept a nameless, unverifiable audio clip as admissible evidence, then this is no longer a courtroom governed by law. She didn't flinch. It's a political stage, and I won't act in someone else's script. The room cracked under the weight of those words. You could hear it, not in noise, but in absence. The scribbles stopped. The jurors sat still, hands motionless. Even the gallery of political insiders and media regulars, people used to spin, used to spectacle, looked shaken, because this wasn't spin, it was exposure. Jasmine turned back to the jury, her voice softer now, but more dangerous in its calm. You were shown 5 seconds. I've shown you the full sentence. You were given a mystery file. I've given you government transcripts. You were asked to speculate. I've asked you to verify. Then after a pause, she finished, not with volume, but with gravity. So ask yourselves, what kind of justice are we building? If 5 unverified seconds now outweigh 5 years of service, 5 pages of truth, and 1 line that no one wanted you to hear. Our job is to lead, not to gloat. But just as Jasmine lowered herself back into her chair, the prosecution's table erupted. Objection, Your Honor! Drayton's voice cracked through the silence like a rifle shot. His composure, once surgically calm, was gone. He shot to his feet so fast his chair skidded backwards with a metallic screech. "This is a distraction," he barked, one hand raised, the other trembling as it clutched his notes. "Counsel is undermining the integrity of the evidence without any formal forensic rebuttal. She's making a speech, not a legal argument." His face flushed red, eyes darting from the judge to the jury like a man watching control slip through his fingers. "This courtroom is not a place for conspiracy theories or political posturing," he growled, his voice rising now, almost desperate. "She can't just declare something inadmissible because she doesn't like it." The room held its breath as Drayton kept going, not waiting for permission. "That recording, anonymous or not, contains her voice, her exact tone, her exact words, and everyone in this courtroom knows it." He jabbed a finger at the flash drive Jasmine had set down. "This isn't about metadata. It's about accountability. We heard her say it. They deserve it." He was pacing now, unraveling by the second. "She wants this jury to believe 5 seconds don't matter? That accountability depends on how evidence arrives instead of what it reveals." He pointed at the jury box now, breath short. "Don't let her rewrite reality just because she's good with words." But the damage was done. The contrast between Jasmine's precision and Drayton's eruption was stark. Undeniable. Where she had been calm, he was frantic. Where she had been fact-driven, he was fuming. Even the jurors who had been leaning toward the prosecution were now shifting back in their seats, visibly unsettled by his sudden heat. Roberts raised a hand slowly, commanding silence with a glance. But the silence this time wasn't procedural. It was a verdict in motion. Because Drayton wasn't objecting to misconduct. He was objecting to losing control. Following Drayton's outburst and the judge's firm call for order, the courtroom once again turned to Jasmine, who hadn't flinched, hadn't moved. She waited just long enough for the air to settle, then rose from her chair, her voice calm but charged like a coiled wire. "Since we're now debating what the law allows and what it doesn't," she said, walking slowly to the center of the room again, "then we must talk about precedent." Her fingers slid another document from the folder, one marked in blue tabs and legal citations. "There is one case the prosecution failed to mention, probably because it dismantles the foundation of their entire argument." Her tone sharpened. "Jenkins v. U.S. Civil Ethics Commission, 2018. She stepped toward the jury box, holding the page up. "In that ruling, the Court of Appeals determined that the Hatch Act could not, and I quote, be retrofitted to prosecute modern expressions of political tone, absent direct, demonstrable electioneering." She turned toward the judge, gaze unflinching. "That case was about a public health official who criticized congressional inaction during a policy update. The Ethics Commission claimed it was partisan. The court ruled it was protected speech." Her voice was stronger now, cutting through the tension like glass through cloth. "Why? Because no funds were solicited. No candidates were endorsed. No campaigns were referenced. It was ruled, not a violation." She let the words drop like a gavel. She took a few steps, pacing slowly now. "The Jenkins decision clarified that the Hatch Act is not a net to catch uncomfortable words. It is a wall to stop institutional abuse of electoral power. The difference matters." She turned sharply. "What I said was no different. I reported the results of a federal policy, not a campaign, not an attack ad. And just like Jenkins, I'm being painted as partisan for refusing to dull the truth to make others feel safe." Her hand tapped the case law firmly. "But precedent protects us all, especially when the law is at risk of becoming someone's weapon of convenience." Now the courtroom felt different again, not shaken, but listening, respectfully, intently. Because Jasmine wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was defending the rule of law from being twisted to fit a narrative. The silence that followed was not the same one that had settled earlier, when Jasmine first walked in or when the audio clip played. This time it was heavier, but not with accusation, with respect. Something had shifted, tangibly. What had started as an ambush trial had slowly, deliberately transformed into a masterclass in restraint, clarity, and forceful intellect. For a long moment, no one moved. Not the jurors, not the press, not the judge. The entire room, once buzzing with anticipation of a public defeat, now sat frozen under the weight of something no one had expected, truth that refused to be politicized. At the bench, Chief Justice Roberts finally stirred. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned back in his leather chair, brought a hand to his forehead, and rubbed gently, like a man recalculating the meaning of everything he had just witnessed. His other hand moved to the transcript Jasmine had entered into the record. He didn't scan it. He read it, line by line. From the opening remarks of the February 15th press briefing, through the exchange with the reporters, down to the sentence that had become the eye of the storm. Some might say they deserve the consequences of opposing our trade policy, but our job is to lead, not to gloat. Roberts narrowed his eyes, staring at the paper like it had personally betrayed him. Then he read it again. The words had a gravity that no 5-second clip could replicate. The fuller sentence didn't sound angry. It didn't sound like propaganda. It sounded like leadership wrapped in realism, a hard truth delivered with restraint. When he finally looked up, his gaze was slower than usual, heavier, but it was also clearer, sharper. "Mr. Drayton," he said at last, his voice echoing through the still courtroom like a dropped pin in a cathedral. "Please approach the bench." The courtroom stirred slightly, barely, but enough. All eyes turned to the prosecution's table. Drayton froze mid-sentence, not speaking, but clearly working through a dozen responses in his head. His face, once resolute, now registered something new, uncertainty. He straightened his suit, smoothed his tie, and stood with the stiffness of a man who suddenly realized the spotlight was no longer in his favor. His steps were slow but purposeful as he approached the bench. Chief Justice Roberts didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Mr. Drayton," he began, eyes locked, tone dry as parchment. "This court has heard considerable argument today regarding the 5-second audio recording submitted by your office. Before we proceed further, I have one specific question for the record." He leaned slightly forward, both hands clasped in front of him. The gallery leaned with him. "Can you confirm the chain of custody for this recording?" Drayton blinked. For a man trained in rhetoric, this wasn't a complicated question. It was binary. But he didn't answer it immediately. His lips parted, his tongue darted once toward the corner of his mouth, and for the first time since the trial began, he didn't look prepared. "Well, Your Honor," he began slowly, "we received the file early this morning, prior to opening arguments, via an encrypted communication from a confidential source." Roberts raised a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. "That's not what I asked." The tension doubled instantly. "I asked if you can confirm the chain of custody," Roberts repeated, firmer now. "Can you tell this court where the recording originated, who recorded it, when it was recorded, and whether it has remained unedited or unaltered in any way since its creation?" Drayton swallowed. Everyone saw it. "Your Honor, we haven't completed the full trace. The source, while credible, is anonymous, and our office has not yet completed authentication." "Then you cannot confirm the chain of custody," Roberts said flatly, his voice slicing through the air. Drayton's mouth opened to respond again, but he thought better of it. He simply nodded, barely. A thick pause followed, and with that, something subtle but irreversible happened in the room. The case began to fall apart, not by explosion, but by implosion. It didn't unravel in a dramatic outburst. It collapsed under the weight of its own weakness. The prosecution's crown jewel, its dramatic, high-impact, anonymous clip, was now officially without foundation, and the man who had wielded it so confidently minutes earlier now stood at the bench, exposed. Back at her table, Jasmine didn't move. She didn't gloat. She didn't even blink. Her fingers remained folded over her folder, still calm, still focused, because she had known this moment was coming. She had counted on it, and now it had arrived. The room no longer held silence. It held gravity, the kind that made men shift in their seats without knowing why, the kind that demanded stillness not out of fear, but out of reverence. Jasmine hadn't spoken for minutes, and yet every word she'd said earlier still hung in the air, like invisible scaffolding. Strong, unshaken. The judge had leaned back, elbow resting gently on the arm of his chair, one hand pressed to his brow, as if even he was struggling to reconcile what had just unfolded in his courtroom. Then came movement, subtle, deliberate. Roberts set down the page he'd been holding, removed his glasses with slow precision, folded them closed, and placed them gently on the bench like a man setting down something fragile. His fingers lingered there for a second. Then, without looking at anyone in particular, he said softly but firmly, "Ms. Crockett." Her name rang out like a bell. Jasmine looked up, calm, unwavering, no expectation in her eyes, only readiness. "I'll be candid with you," Roberts began, his voice carrying a texture that hadn't been there before. "When I took this bench for today's hearing, I had a different assumption in mind. I thought I'd be hearing a defense draped in partisanship, a political maneuver dressed in legal language. I assumed we were in for spin, calculated, careful, and empty." He paused, his gaze lifting directly to hers now. "But that's not what you brought into this courtroom." The tension deepened, sharp but silent. The reporters lowered their pens. Even Drayton didn't move. "You brought the law," Roberts continued, "line by line, section by section, and you didn't just recite it, you applied it, with precision, with restraint, with discipline." He gestured briefly to the documents on the bench before him. "You brought me the Hatch Act as written, not as distorted. You brought me Jenkins v. U.S. Civil Ethics Commission and reminded this court that statutes are not shaped by outrage, but by precedent and intention." Then his voice dropped slightly, but the weight of it only increased. The prosecution's central claim rested on a 5-second audio clip, delivered anonymously, without metadata, without timestamp, without authentication. His fingers tapped the flash drive lightly, twice like a gavel. That file, in this court's view, fails every standard of admissibility. It cannot be validated, its chain of custody does not exist, and its submission timing raises more questions than answers. It is therefore excluded from consideration in its entirety. The courtroom didn't gasp. It didn't need to. Roberts looked again to the transcript Jasmine had provided. He picked it up, scanned the lines silently, then read aloud, slowly for all to hear. "Some might say they deserve the consequences of opposing our trade policy, but our job is to lead, not to gloat." He set the paper down. "That," he said clearly, "is not a call to vote. It is not a campaign message. It is not an attempt to sway an election or fundraise or solicit partisan support. It is a message of restraint, a message of professionalism, and a direct contradiction to the accusation that Ms. Crockett violated the Hatch Act." His hands folded together now, his shoulders straight. "This court finds no evidence of electoral influence, no violation of federal statute, no abuse of office, and no legal justification to pursue this charge further." He paused. "Ms. Jasmine Crockett," he said, "you are found not liable under the Hatch Act." Somewhere in the gallery, a hand rose to cover a mouth. A juror slowly closed their eyes. The click of a camera shutter was the only sound daring to move. But Roberts wasn't finished. He exhaled slowly, as if shedding years of rigid thinking, and said something no one in that room, no one watching on the feed, no one reporting live, was prepared for. He looked directly at Jasmine, his voice softer now but more personal. "You made me reconsider something today, something I didn't expect to question. I've read the Hatch Act dozens of times. I've ruled on its application. I thought I knew its purpose." His gaze lingered. "But you reminded me that even statutes must be read with clarity, not convenience, that the law cannot be stretched to fit discomfort, only abuse." He sat back in his chair, quiet, contemplative, and then, in a voice that was almost reflective, he concluded, "You made me rethink my own understanding of this law." The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The silence that followed wasn't a vacuum. It was full of vindication, full of reckoning, full of the realization that a single voice, clear, calm, unapologetic, had not only dismantled the prosecution's case, she had rewritten the assumptions of the very man who held the gavel. The gavel's final slam echoed long after the judge's words had hung in the air, but Jasmine Crockett made no show of triumph as the chamber slowly emptied. She gathered her folder with deliberate care, her expression neither joyous nor defiant, simply composed, like a soldier lowering her weapon after a long, hard-fought battle. As she stepped away from the defense table, her pace was measured, almost ritualistic. Every step echoed the weight of responsibility rather than the cheers of victory. Outside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric, a blend of hushed admiration and speculative tension, as reporters surged forward like storm-driven waves, desperate for one more quote. "Is this a political victory?" someone shouted from a cluster of microphones and cameras, their voices mingling with the clamor of flashing bulbs. Jasmine paused at the threshold of the court's massive oak door, her eyes meeting the frantic gaze of the press gathered around the stairs. In that brief moment, time seemed to slow. The questions of the media hung in the air like suspended animation, heavy with expectation and controversy. With a calm yet resolute tone that cut through the cacophony, she replied, "No, this isn't a political victory." Her voice was low, measured, but unwavering, a declaration of principles that resonated far deeper than partisan triumph. "This," she continued, her gaze unwavering and voice imbued with the quiet intensity of resolute conviction, "is a victory for the rule of law." Every word she spoke carried the weight of centuries of legal tradition, the promise of fairness over spectacle, and the enduring belief that justice must be free from the sway of political manipulation. As reporters crowded around her, microphones thrust forward like spears seeking the heart of a truth. Jasmine's hands remained steady at her sides, a silent reminder that this battle was won not through grand gestures or applause, but through the meticulous construction of legal clarity. The press hounded her with rapid-fire questions, each one an eager attempt to capture a snippet of what, in public discourse, was deemed a monumental win. Yet despite their barrage, she maintained her composure, her eyes reflecting an inner fire tempered by years of experience on the front lines of justice. "Our system," she declared, her voice clear enough to be heard even over the clamor of chaos, "is not meant to reward flair or to foster a culture of political theatrics. It is designed to safeguard our democratic principles, ensuring that law and order prevail above raw emotion." Every syllable reverberated like a solemn promise that the truth, though hard-won, was the most enduring form of victory. In that moment, as the swirl of questions and camera flashes ebbed into an expectant silence, Jasmine's stance spoke volumes more than any grand proclamation might. Even as a cluster of television cameras zoomed in on her slowly receding figure, the sincerity in her tone and the determined set of her shoulders defied the conventional narrative of triumph. Her measured departure was not a retreat but an assertion, a calm assertion that justice, when executed with integrity and transparency, serves as a bulwark against the tide of populist demagoguery. The injustice she had faced in that courtroom, an injustice masked by selective editing, anonymous evidence, and political theatrics, was now countered by a profound reaffirmation of the rule of law. And though there was no raucous celebration, no jubilant cheers ringing down the hallways of justice, a new kind of applause was heard, one that resonated in the silent nods of jurors, the thoughtful glances of legal experts, and the quiet gratitude of everyday citizens who believed in fairness. Outside the courthouse, in the chilly morning air, thick with anticipation, her departure became a rallying cry for those who had long felt marginalized by a system that often bent the rules in favor of the powerful. People gathered around, not to celebrate a political victory, but to witness a cornerstone of democracy reaffirmed. A reminder that the true victory lay in holding every public official accountable to the highest standards of integrity. With each step she took, the cameras captured not just her image, but a resolve that transcended party lines, a strength that spoke of unyielding principle over fleeting popularity. The narrative that once sought to paint her as a partisan provocateur was now being rewritten in real time, a narrative that would serve as a beacon of hope for advocates of justice everywhere. Jasmine's measured reply to the press, that quiet but powerful declaration, "This is a victory for the rule of law," was not just a retort to a barrage of insistent questions. It was a statement of enduring truth, one that would echo far beyond the cold stone walls of the courthouse. In that charged moment, while the flash bulbs burst like constellations in the morning sky and voices fell to an expectant hush, it became clear. This was not about political wins or losses. It was about the preservation of a legal system meant to serve all people, regardless of the forces arrayed against them. Jasmine Crockett, by standing firm and speaking plain truth, had not only defended her own honor, she had defended the sanctity of the law itself. No sooner had the gavel's echo faded in the hushed courtroom than the digital sphere erupted, capturing every angle of Jasmine Crockett's unexpected victory and broadcasting it across countless devices worldwide. The once quiet corners of social media lit up like constellations in a midnight sky, hashtags cascading through feeds at breathtaking speed. Honor, voice of reason, Shakri, modernize, the Hatch Act, Zaina, true justice, each one amplifying the incredulity and admiration swirling around her name. Journalists who had arrived expecting a swift condemnation suddenly found themselves scrambling to file breaking stories about the woman who dismantled a case built on 5 seconds of nameless audio, leaving the prosecution shaken and exposed. The trial video, clipped into bite-sized segments by eager netizens, went viral in a matter of hours, each highlight reel casting fresh light on Jasmine's unwavering calm and surgical arguments. Influencers who typically chased clickbait were now dissecting legal precedents, discussing free speech boundaries, and examining whether America's statutes were outdated relics ripe for political exploitation. All over Twitter and beyond, a spontaneous wave of commentary began emerging from ordinary citizens, some praising Jasmine as the hero they never knew they needed, others confessing surprise that the justice system could still produce such clarity when confronted by raw determination. Public polls popped up across major networks, their questions blunt and urgent. Is the Hatch Act too broad, too vague, used as a political cudgel rather than a legislative shield? Even talk shows known more for celebrity gossip than civic discourse pivoted their segments to the real substance behind Jasmine's defense, inviting seasoned legal analysts to parse every one of her statements. As the hours stretched, the intensity only grew, turning that once obscure technical statute into a top trending topic, while the calm in which Jasmine had faced the storm became the symbolic heart of a national conversation. Before long, the energy reached beyond Washington's borders, seeping into living rooms, college dorms, and even rural communities far removed from the capital's daily political theatrics. Clusters of neighbors found themselves huddled over smartphones, debating the meaning of Jasmine's full quote. Some might say they deserve the consequences of opposing our trade policy, but our job is to lead, not to gloat. And realizing how drastically it differed from the cherry-picked snippets circulated to cast her in a villainous light. Political science students, energized by the spectacle, organized late-night Zoom sessions to dissect Jenkins v. U.S. Civil Ethics Commission, 2018, referencing how Jasmine drew on that precedent to defend her stance with surgical precision. Even the older generation, some of whom admitted they had grown jaded by long cycles of hollow accusations and partisan brawls, reported feeling a spark of cautious optimism. Perhaps the law could be reclaimed from the jaws of political showmanship. Influential columnists, who normally centered their writing on polling data and scandal chasing, wrote impassioned op-eds praising Jasmine for reminding America that statutes remain only as robust as the integrity with which they're applied. Meanwhile, activists co-opted the #Voice of Reason hashtag to demand transparency in other cases, where fleeting, context-stripped evidence had been weaponized against people without the resources or eloquence to fight back. As national discourse expanded, voices from both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, found themselves reluctantly aligned on one point: the notion that the Hatch Act and laws like it might need modernizing to reflect 21st century political realities. But this wasn't some neat, bipartisan epiphany. It was a chaotic swirl of arguments, press releases, cable news segments, and fierce Twitter debates, all orbiting around one unstoppable fact. The woman they tried to label as a political offender had become a beacon of legal clarity instead. Seemingly overnight, Jasmine Crockett evolved from an unknown White House spokesperson to a symbol of reasoned defiance, her calm resolve now the rallying cry for anyone tired of seeing laws bent by those who treated them as rhetorical weapons. Indeed, the moment transcended standard partisanship and breathed new life into a skeptical public, many of whom had begun to suspect that courts had lost their backbone in the face of orchestrated political drama. In the midst of this national whirlwind, a single handwritten letter somehow managed to capture the raw humanity hidden behind all the legal intricacies and media buzz. It came from a retired combat veteran named Rick Connolly, a 58-year-old Texan who had watched the trial's livestream from his small ranch on the outskirts of Lubbock. Rick, who rarely spoke publicly about politics, found himself unexpectedly moved by Jasmine's composure and conviction, enough to put pen to paper for the first time in years. His letter was short, scrawled in blocky script on lined paper, but powerful. He thanked Jasmine for fighting with intellect and calm rather than fury or fear, saying her manner reminded him of what he believed the military stood for: clarity of mission and resolute honor in the face of chaos. When the letter surfaced on social media, somehow intercepted by a local news station that did a heartfelt segment on it, it further galvanized the wave of public interest. Veterans groups began posting messages of support, praising Jasmine for embodying the spirit of service that extends beyond politics or party affiliation. Disabled vets, spouses of active duty service members, and other Texans weighed in, expressing relief that maybe, just maybe, the system wasn't irreparably broken. Their voices amplified Rick's simple tribute to unstoppable proportions, proving that the trial had ignited more than just a legal debate. It sparked a reclamation of principles like honor, fairness, and accountability. As the letter gained traction online, a journalist from Houston wrote a moving editorial stating that Jasmine's determination was the kind of leadership we salute in uniform and the kind we desperately need in our civic institutions. Across social platforms, screenshots of Rick's humble, handwritten words quickly became a viral symbol of a broader sentiment: hope for a justice system guided by facts rather than political caricature, and admiration for a lone voice that had shattered a prosecutorial siege with unflinching poise. What began as an arcane legal skirmish had transformed into a cultural phenomenon, weaving together threads of law, patriotism, and personal integrity in a tapestry more robust than anyone could have imagined. The injustice Jasmine had faced, where a selectively edited clip and anonymous, unverifiable evidence nearly derailed her career, resonated with countless individuals who had felt marginalized by systems that favored influence over truth. Media commentators, typically hungry for sensational soundbites, found themselves compelled to shift focus from scandal to scholarship, inviting constitutional experts on air to discuss the significance of government speech and the critical role of context in determining intent. Legal blogs exploded with articles dissecting every strategic move Jasmine made, from referencing specific sections of the Hatch Act to her quiet but devastating takedown of the prosecution's chain of custody failures. Gradually, it dawned on the public that the real scandal was not her boldness, but the fact that the system allowed an unverified recording to claim so much power in the first place. This realization spurred countless calls for not just a modernization of the Hatch Act, but a broader reevaluation of how evidence is admitted in politically charged cases. Even those who still questioned her politics found themselves unable to deny the moral gravity of her stand against weaponized innuendo. The story became more than just one woman's defense. It was a raw, unfiltered testament to how easily the pillars of justice can be shaken when cynicism and convenience overshadow due process. Instead of being relegated to a minor footnote in the annals of political missteps, Jasmine's trial now stood as a clarion call, urging every citizen to examine the boundaries between law and theater, principle and propaganda, fear and fairness. Amid this nationwide uproar, hashtags like Voice of Reason and Modernize the Hatch Act burned like neon flares across every social platform, acting as rally points for people who, until recently, had felt disconnected from or even betrayed by the judicial system. Forums once devoted to petty debates over celebrity gossip suddenly found themselves peppered with discussions about textualism, statutory construction, and the constitutional concept of free speech within government roles. College debate teams seized on the trial as a real-world case study, not just in law, but in ethics, rhetoric, and the delicate balance between government transparency and political grandstanding. Amid the torrent of reactions and reposts, the veteran's letter from Texas glowed like a humble torch in the night, a reminder that beneath all the sophisticated arguments lay an undeniable truth. The rule of law is meant to protect, not to silence, and it must be wielded with caution and clarity lest it erode into a mere political tool. More than a few political figures, sensing the cultural shift, issued statements claiming they always believed in thorough legal scrutiny, though their records of championing such scrutiny were questionable at best. News outlets that once thrived on daily outrage found themselves forced to air interviews with constitutional scholars dissecting the subtle nuance that set Jasmine apart. Her unwavering refusal to turn facts into slogans or politics into warfare. Through it all, the trial's video feed, shared, retweeted, analyzed in every corner of the internet, remained the definitive artifact of a day when the system tried to quell a voice, only to be reminded of its own core obligations. While some viewers saw it as an indictment of a broken process, many more found hope in the simple possibility that one articulate, measured individual could still tip the scales back toward fairness. Long after the hashtags trended and the news cycle churned on, the memory of Jasmine's calm under the harshest spotlight endured, shaping dialogues from local PTA meetings to late-night Washington think tank sessions, all asking the same question. If the law can be reclaimed by reason once, can it be done again? The conversation around Jasmine's trial had exploded into a nationwide movement, with social media buzzing, talk shows debating, and even a retired veteran sending a heartfelt letter of gratitude. Yet beyond the hashtags and the viral clips, many wondered what deeper lesson lingered in the aftermath, what human truth lay beneath the layers of legal drama and political tension. Some stories end in a ringing of bells, anthems of triumph, or the shock of a falling gavel, but Jasmine's concluded on a quieter note, one that demanded the audience lean in rather than cheer. Perhaps that was the first lesson. Not all victories need fanfare. In that hushed finale, where the system conceded that laws must be interpreted with integrity, people saw a flicker of something more powerful than political outcomes. They saw dignity. Her case had reeked of injustice from the start, built on an anemic 5-second clip conjured by an unnamed source. Yet she refused to answer aggression with aggression, holding firm to a calm that defied all expectations of a performance. In doing so, she reminded everyone how easily public servants and the statutes that govern them can be manipulated by ambition, short-sightedness, or pure opportunism. The injustice she faced wasn't just personal, it was a mirror reflecting every time someone's words were twisted for gain. But that very injustice became a crucible, forging a broader message about resilience and moral fortitude. Her composure proved that rational argument, tethered to truth, can dismantle entire edifices of spin. But if there was one thread weaving through all her adversity, it was the unspoken question that haunted every corner of the trial. Is the law truly for everyone, or just for those who wield it most cleverly? Jasmine's journey exposed how a single act of selective editing, armed with bureaucratic momentum, could place an innocent public servant in the crosshairs. Through her eyes, the world glimpsed how easily the legal system can be tilted when a person's context is stripped away and replaced with sensational half-truths. Yet her steadfast stance, combined with her reverence for the law as it was written, spotlighted an even greater issue. Laws like the Hatch Act were designed to protect democracy, not to be harnessed as political weapons. By surviving that trial, she did more than vindicate herself. She reignited conversations about how laws must evolve alongside technology in modern discourse. It wasn't a flamboyant or fiery crusade. It was a measured, dignified stance that lent credibility to her cause. Throughout, she illustrated how personal integrity can meet intimidation head-on, proving once again that calm clarity under pressure can shine more brightly than grandstanding. In a system so often overshadowed by drama, her measured approach revealed that authenticity can still triumph. Amid the swirl of pundits and talking heads, perhaps the most crucial realization was this: people make institutions, and institutions reflect people's choices. Jasmine's trial was, at its core, a test of whether the justice system could still adhere to principle in an era when social media fury and political expedience frequently overshadow due process. The stakes felt impossibly high because every step she took was observed, dissected, and criticized by forces itching to see her fail. Yet her triumph wasn't just an individual redemption, it was a signpost for citizens nationwide. A reminder that a single voice, armed with truth, can still bend the arc of procedure. By honoring the full transcript instead of a selective snippet, the court reaffirmed that the devil truly is in the details, and that ignoring context can lead to false convictions and rhetorical lynchings. The moral tension lay in witnessing just how prepared powerful entities were to dismiss that context for a fleeting advantage. Her unwavering posture taught observers that composure is not passivity, but an active refusal to be manipulated or provoked. In a spectacle-laden culture, her calm was as startling as a thunderclap, jolting people into reassessing the old adage that the loudest voice always prevails. Instead, she showed that the most resolute argument can often be the quietest one. Perhaps the greatest injustice Jasmine encountered was the brazen assumption that her role in government granted her no room for nuanced speech. The moment she dared to frame a policy outcome in candid terms, critics pounced, reducing her stance to a caricature. The universal message here was that public figures, especially those who speak for administrations, walk a perilous line where each word can be hijacked to serve an opposing narrative. Through her ordeal, Jasmine inadvertently shed light on the fragility of democracy itself. Because if those entrusted with explaining policies are forced to muzzle honesty or risk condemnation, the public suffers from a lack of unfiltered truth. By holding her ground, she revealed the hidden cost of orchestrated controversies. They deter genuine discourse and strangle the open exchange of ideas. More profoundly, her perseverance exposed the moral vacuum that develops when policy is overshadowed by politics. Where some saw a chance to exploit her words, she saw a duty to place clarity above obfuscation, proving that a single truthful statement can defend an entire principle. Her courage resonated with citizens fed up with spin, reminding them that authenticity is not a luxury, but a cornerstone of responsible governance. And in a final poetic turn, her presence became a testament to how restraint in the face of provocation can be the most potent form of self-defense. Critically, the lesson extended beyond the walls of the courtroom and the ephemeral swarm of hashtags. The philosophical underpinnings of her story echoed like a distant drumbeat in civic classrooms, grassroots rallies, and across dinner tables. People began acknowledging a grim truth. An unchecked appetite for sensational headlines can transform innocent individuals into overnight villains, condensing entire careers and reputations into a mere handful of seconds. Jasmine confronted that reality head-on, not by unleashing fury, but by meticulously building a scaffold of fact, context, and legal principle. In doing so, she spoke to broader systemic vulnerabilities, challenging everyone to ask, how often do we judge prematurely, fueled by snippets instead of substance? Ultimately, her testament was that legality hinges on clarity, not on the theatrics of accusation. And if the public allows flimsy evidence to stand uncontested, they risk turning the justice system itself into a veritable stage where truth depends on who yells loudest. By withstanding this crucible, Jasmine modeled the power of personal integrity, the kind that cannot be overshadowed by misinformation once the full story surfaces. Her lesson was simultaneously a call for humility and vigilance, urging society to reflect on how quickly it can be roused into anger by half-truths. Another dimension of her human journey was the stark isolation she faced, underscoring how people in the public sphere are often left to weather attacks alone. To many watchers, Jasmine's calm might have seemed unshakable, but her story carried the unmistakable weight of someone who understood the stakes all too well. She reminded them that courage isn't about feeling no fear, it's about proceeding despite it. In telling the full narrative of her statement, once maliciously slashed, she signaled that context matters every bit as much as content, a crucial principle that often goes missing in soundbite culture. From the outside, her ordeal was a roller coaster of political high drama. For her, it was a day-to-day fight for basic fairness, a fight that any citizen could one day face if misrepresented by an unscrupulous system. This potential for victimization, looming over countless unsuspecting individuals, formed the crux of her moral outcry. She wasn't just fighting for her own exoneration. She was fighting to reaffirm the bedrock of justice, proving how precarious that foundation can become if left unguarded. That is the quiet heroism in her story, refusing to let cynicism overshadow principle, even when outnumbered and under relentless scrutiny. Ultimately, her unwavering demeanor carried a lesson more precious than any political label could offer. Steadfastness, tempered by clarity, is how the powerless can oppose a flawed narrative and reclaim their truth. But perhaps the most poignant element, the one that lingered long after the last camera crew had left, was how her victory illuminated an abiding human truth. We all have a duty to guard against convenience, masquerading as fact. Time and again, Jasmine could have surrendered to easier routes, bowing to pressure, cutting deals, or playing theatrics to fight theatrics. Instead, she chose the far more demanding path of due process, channeling law in its purest form, citing statutes, unveiling transcripts, and insisting on chain of custody. Each step was a rejection of a culture that craves sensationalism over solidity. This unwavering fidelity to method was not only a legal triumph, it was a moral one. When the judge declared her innocent of any Hatch Act violation and further admitted to rethinking his own reading of the statute, it felt like a cosmic alignment. Principle, normally overshadowed by petty political battles, reclaimed its rightful place at the center of justice. That was her real gift to the nation, reminding people that the law, for all its vulnerabilities, can still shine when wielded by those who refuse to compromise on truth. But she didn't do it with applause lines or false bravado. She did it with the unadorned power of evidence. At the heart of this entire saga is a deeply human lesson about identity, responsibility, and collective faith in an imperfect system. Jasmine's story did not culminate in a Hollywood crescendo. It ended in a subdued but resonant reaffirmation that justice is neither guaranteed nor automatic. It must be fought for, line by line, exhibit by exhibit, moment by moment, in front of onlookers who might be expecting fireworks. The real fireworks here were the illusions that got dismantled. The notion that unverified audio can crush a career, that the highest court in the land would sanction political innuendo, that speaking truth to power is inherently self-destructive. Instead, watchers were treated to a grounded demonstration of how a single individual, armed with facts, unwavering composure, and a refusal to be cowed, can push back against the machinery of intimidation. For every person who sees themselves as too small to matter in the grand stage of policy, Jasmine's example stands as a testament that sometimes the best weapon is clarity. Yes, the injustice she confronted felt suffocating, but it proved powerless against rigorous evidence and the calm conviction to present it. In the aftermath, her voice resonates as a clarion call. Trust the process, but also hold it accountable. When law and sincerity meet, even entrenched systems must pause and listen. In the end, the legacy of this case transcends the swirl of social media, the sudden spate of televised debates, and the rush of academics dissecting Jenkins versus United States Civil Ethics Commission. Its real impact lies in how it reminded a weary public that the law can still function as it was meant to, provided people are willing to stand their ground, to pay attention, to question, and to demand transparency. For every cynic who believed that the fix is always in, Jasmine's unwavering grace in the face of hostility offered a counterstory of human decency and institutional redemption. That doesn't erase the unfairness she endured, nor does it mean every case will resolve so favorably, but it plants a seed of possibility. It tells us that the system, though flawed, isn't beyond reclamation. It warns us against complacency, reminding us that silence in the face of weaponized half-truths can be as dangerous as the lies themselves. And it challenges future defendants, judges, and ordinary citizens alike to see the law not as a blunt instrument, but as a precise tool, a scaffold upon which justice can actually stand if given the chance. Ironically, it took a near-fatal blow to her reputation to reveal this possibility. And so, the real moral here is about forging resilience, truth and compassion under pressure, ensuring that no fleeting spin can overwrite the steady hum of honesty. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference. A federal judge screamed like a madman, ordering the immediate arrest of attorney Jasmine Crockett right in the courtroom. But just 2 minutes later, the FBI stormed in and cuffed him in front of everyone. She didn't shout. She didn't flinch. She simply placed an envelope on the table, and everything collapsed. So what was inside that envelope? So explosive, it brought an entire network of power crashing down before the public's eyes. Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. It was a Tuesday morning wrapped in gray clouds, and the federal courthouse in D.C. felt colder than the wind outside. Not because of the weather, but because of him. Judge Malcolm Travers entered the building like a king inspecting his crumbling castle, his black robes trailing behind like a shadow of unchecked authority. His eyes, sharp and sunken, scanned the room for signs of disobedience, not justice. Thermostat at 69 degrees? Drop it to 67 now, he barked at the bailiff, not even pausing to hear a reply. Without warning, he snapped at his court clerk, threatening to replace her if she didn't. Stop typing like a chicken pecking seed. This wasn't a courtroom. It was a stage for Trevor's daily tantrums, where the gavel served not justice, but ego. Today, Trevor's thought it would be just another show. Another day of unchecked power behind a robe, until he glanced at the docket and saw the name. Jasmine Crockett. His fingers froze mid-tap. His eyes narrowed. The woman who once took down a governor on live television with nothing but case law and composure. Her? Here? In his courtroom? The man who silenced dozens suddenly found his voice caught in his throat. The moment her heels clicked against the marble floor, the energy shifted. Jasmine Crockett had arrived. No theatrics, no entourage, just presence. Now she stood tall in a charcoal suit, eyes sharp, jaw steady, unbothered by the man gripping the gavel. Her client, Eleanor Haynes, sat quietly beside her, a retired nurse who had spent her final working years building shelters for homeless women. She was charged with financial fraud, accused of misusing donations, though every record pointed to transparency. A woman who had given everything now stood on trial, not for what she did, but for what she believed. And Jasmine wasn't here to play defense. She was here to expose the setup. But Judge Travers didn't just see a defense attorney walk through his door. He saw a challenge, a disruption. A black woman with a sharp mind and a national reputation, something he had always treated with contempt, not respect. He leaned back in his chair with the practiced smugness of a man too used to having the final word. His eyes raked over Jasmine from head to toe, and then he delivered the first strike, not with evidence or legal argument, but with a smirk and a sentence soaked in arrogance. So, he said loudly, like he wanted everyone in the room to hear, this is the Attorney General they sent to make a scene? Another loudmouth in heels, thinking she can turn a fraud case into a race protest? His words were like a slap, sharp, intentional, humiliating. Then he looked her dead in the eyes and said it without even trying to hide the insult. You walk in here acting like the law belongs to you. Like just because you're black and bold, we all have to bow. You're not justice, Miss Crockett. You're just another activist pretending to be a lawyer. Silence fell across the room like a dropped curtain. A few quiet coughs. A rustle in the gallery. Even the prosecutor stopped writing. The words hung in the air. Ugly, unmistakable. And Travers just leaned back, satisfied. To him, it was just another move. Another way to assert dominance and let everyone in the room know who held the gavel and who didn't. But Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't step back. She didn't let his words find purchase. Instead, she stepped forward, just one pace. And when she spoke, her voice was steady, calm, precise, like the click of a lock before a vault swings open. With all due respect, Your Honor, she said, I'm not here to parade anything. I'm here because a woman who's dedicated her life to serving others is being accused of a crime she didn't commit, and someone needs to speak the truth in this room, even if it's inconvenient." Her eyes didn't waver. Her posture didn't shift. She went on. "You may control this courtroom, but you don't control the law. The law belongs to the people, and I intend to use every line of it to defend my client, without apology and without fear." There was no anger in her tone, just resolve. Trevor's shifted slightly, his smirk fading at the edges. Jasmine had answered his insult with restraint, reason, and power. The kind of power that comes not from position, but from principle. And in that moment, even the gallery could feel it. This wasn't going to be a normal trial. It was going to be a reckoning. The insult had barely finished echoing off the marble walls when Jasmine moved. No hesitation, no reaction, just pure focus. She calmly reached into her leather briefcase, flipped the latch with a quiet click, and pulled out a navy blue binder marked with a silver tab. Exhibit A. The gallery leaned in. Even the prosecutor paused mid-scribble. Jasmine stepped to the center of the courtroom and laid the folder gently on the evidence table, like she was placing a scalpel on an operating tray, ready to cut stray. "These," she began, her voice deliberate but controlled, "are the complete financial records for the Eleanor Haynes Foundation. 7 years of banking history, including quarterly reports, 501c3 filings, grant documentation, and expense breakdowns." She opened the binder slowly, revealing page after page of printed statements, color-coded, time-stamped, notarized. Each transaction is tracked, each donation is sourced, and every penny has gone directly towards shelter, food, clothing, and healthcare. She looked up, not at the jury, not at the prosecutor, but directly at Judge Travers. "There is no fraud here, Your Honor. There is no deception. There is only the work of a woman who dedicated her life to helping others and is now being prosecuted for doing too much good in a system that punishes the wrong people." But just as Jasmine let the last page fall into place, barely a breath passed before the attack came. Predictable, premeditated. "Objection!" Prosecutor Langley shot to his feet like a spring-loaded trap, voice raised just enough to sound urgent, but not frantic. "These documents were not submitted during discovery. Your Honor, we have no record of this audit, no notification, no timeline for verification. This is a blatant ambush." He waved his hand toward the binder on the table, like it was some sort of contraband, not federal paperwork stamped and signed. "We move to strike the entire exhibit as inadmissible and prejudicial." Jasmine didn't move. Her hand stayed steady on the binder, her eyes calmly tracking every word. But she knew exactly what this was. A rehearsed play, a two-man routine. Because almost on cue, Judge Travers leaned forward with the same self-satisfied look he'd worn since the moment she entered his court. "Well," he drawled, his tone heavy with sarcasm, "isn't this interesting?" He narrowed his eyes at Jasmine like a school principal catching a student with a cheat sheet. "Ms. Crockett, are you seriously presenting new evidence in my courtroom? Evidence the prosecution hasn't reviewed, wasn't aware of, and now can't cross-examine? This audit magically appears today? During opening proceedings?" His voice sharpened. "This feels like more than a clerical error. ITFEELSCALCULATED. The word calculated hung in the air like smoke after shot. Then he said it. "You were trying to slide this in under the wire, weren't you?" A beat passed. Silence. "This is manipulation," he continued, now louder, addressing the courtroom more than Jasmine. "A strategic delay, a deliberate stunt to throw off the integrity of this process. And frankly, I'm not inclined to let this circus act continue." The words hit hard, not just for what they accused, but for what they implied. That Jasmine, a decorated legal expert, had no right to be trusted. That her preparation, her evidence, her position meant nothing if a judge chose not to see it. And in that moment, it became painfully clear. The rules here were whatever Travers decided they were. But Jasmine didn't back down. Not now. Not after being accused of deception in a courtroom built on double standards. She reached calmly into her case folder, pulled out a smaller document protector, and held it up for the court to see. a time-stamped delivery receipt. "Your Honor," she said, her voice firm but controlled, "this audit was submitted to the clerk's office on March 15th at 9:47 a.m. This is the signed confirmation. Your clerk received it, your office logged it, and I have a certified copy right here." She walked it over to the evidence table with the steady grace of someone who'd been in rooms where the truth was the only weapon she had. "Page 47 of the discovery file, labeled, indexed, and submitted within deadline." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The paper said enough. But Trevor's face tightened. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the bench, jaw clenching with something dangerously close to panic disguised as authority. "That's irrelevant," he snapped. "I don't recall reviewing it, and if I didn't see it, it doesn't exist in this courtroom." His voice rose, echoing through the chamber. "Let me make something crystal clear, Miss Crockett. I decide what evidence is allowed. Not you, not the clerk, not this piece of paper." He pointed a shaking finger at the document she had just submitted. "You don't walk into my courtroom and tell me what's admissible. I am the judge. I am the law here." And just like that, the illusion shattered. This wasn't justice. This was ego in a robe, furious that someone had dared to beat him at his own rigged game. The courtroom air had grown so thick it pressed against the chest like a weight, but Jasmine didn't blink. She stood tall, voice unwavering, hands resting on the evidence binder like it was anchored to truth itself. "Your Honor," she began, calm and deliberate. "Under Federal Rule of Evidence 902, certified financial records, when properly prepared and documented, do not require a witness to testify to their accuracy. These documents are considered self-authenticating. If created in the normal course of business and accompanied by a signed declaration from a qualified accountant, they are accepted as valid without further challenge. This audit meets every requirement of that rule." This wasn't grandstanding. It was procedure. It was law. And in a courtroom where power had often outweighed principle, the rules were meant to be the last remaining anchor of fairness. But Judge Travers didn't take it that way. He leaned forward like a coiled wire snapping loose. "Excuse me?" he said, voice low and dangerous. "Are you seriously standing there quoting rules to me?" His laugh was short, sharp, bitter. "Let me get this straight. You walk into my courtroom, toss some paperwork on my desk, and then have the nerve to instruct me on federal procedure?" His eyes narrowed, lips curling into something more venomous than a smirk. "You think just because you can recite a few numbers out of the evidence code, you're going—" He wasn't just annoyed. He was offended, not by the law itself, but by who was speaking it. A black woman, a defense attorney, someone who refused to defer, who refused to shrink. "You dare lecture me about how my courtroom works?" Travers growled, now standing halfway out of his seat. "I've been wearing this robe since you were learning how to format footnotes. I don't need a crash course from someone who just rolled out of law school with a shiny title and something to prove." The insult cut deeper than procedure. It wasn't about the rule. It was about silencing the person citing it. The message was clear. You don't belong here, not with your voice, not with your confidence, not with your truth. And for the first time, even the jury began to shift uncomfortably because they weren't watching a fair trial anymore. They were watching a man unravel. Tension hung thick in the room, yet Jasmine remained still, composed, deliberate, untouchable. The storm of accusations had been swirling around her, but now she quietly turned the tide. With a single step forward, she set a black evidence folder on the table, its thin spine pressed flat against the polished wood. No raised voice, no dramatic gesture, just timing and truth. "Before the court proceeds," she said calmly, her words slicing through the silence like a scalpel through silk, "there is one further matter concerning the impartiality of these proceedings." The gallery leaned forward. Travers narrowed his eyes. Last night at 9:17 p.m., security cameras recorded Judge Travers entering the Liberty Building parking garage, 3rd floor, southeast stairwell entrance. At 9:21 p.m., footage shows prosecutor Daniel Langley arriving. 90 seconds later, Charles Heron joined them. The three remained there for 7 minutes. No reaction came from the bench. None was needed. The wall seemed to tense in his place. Jasmine opened the folder slowly. The first image showed the silver Lexus SUV, door ajar. The next, a grainy but unmistakable photo of all three men standing close, angled away from the camera. One frame later, Langley checking his watch, Heron glancing over his shoulder. Each photo stamped with time, date, and camera ID. Not theory. Proof. She turned the page. A printed restaurant receipt from 10:43 p.m. listed 3 entrees, 1 bottle of Syrah, and a signed tip line. The venue, Lardon Noir, located 2 blocks from the garage. On the following page, a GPS activity report tracked Heron's phone from his office to the garage to the restaurant and back again, with coordinates and timestamps matched to cell tower data. The phone had pinged within 12 feet of Trevor's car at the exact time the camera footage placed them together. None of it was speculative. None of it circumstantial. It was cross-verified, time-aligned, and already filed into evidence before the hearing began. These records, Jasmine stated, voice even but unmistakably pointed, were obtained through subpoena and reviewed by a third-party forensic analyst. Their authenticity is not in dispute. She placed the documents neatly on the court's evidence display. This is not conjecture. This is chain of custody, verified surveillance, geolocation data, and financial record, linking a sitting judge, a lead prosecutor, and a registered federal lobbyist the night before a trial. The silence that followed was not stunned. It was stunned recognition. Recognition of what it meant, of what it suggested, of how far the rot might run beneath the surface. As the last page of evidence landed on the display, something in Judge Trevor's cracked. His composure shattered, not with a whisper, but a roar. He surged forward behind the bench, face flushed deep crimson, voice breaking through the tense silence like a siren. "This is outrageous," he shouted, the words echoing louder than his gavel ever could. "This is harassment, an attack on the federal judiciary." He pointed at Jasmine with a trembling hand, as if casting blame could erase what had just been laid bare. "Remove her, now!" His voice cracked mid-sentence. "This is judicial intimidation. She will be held in contempt, charged with obstruction, possibly even federal crimes. Do it." The courtroom officers near the rear doors didn't move, not one. 2 bailiffs, usually swift to act on the judge's commands, remained frozen in place. One looked at the other, unsure. The second glanced toward the evidence screen, still showing the judge's late-night meeting, and then to Jasmine, who stood calm, resolute, unshaken. No one reached for a radio. No one stepped forward. It wasn't defiance. It was hesitation. Doubt. The kind that crawls in when something feels wrong. Deeply, unmistakably wrong. Trevor's voice grew shrill, losing its practiced edge. "Did you not hear me? I said remove her. Clear this courtroom if you have to." His hands slammed the bench again, harder this time. But the sound felt hollow now. The power behind it had drained. Authority, once automatic, now required begging. Still nothing. Jasmine didn't speak. She didn't need to. The documents had done it for her. The judge's panic was speaking louder than any objection ever could. And in that moment, every soul in that room, jury, clerk, even the prosecution, understood the shift. The man who had ruled with fear was now ruled by it. The room was frozen. Judge Travers had shouted, slammed his hand, barked orders, but no one moved. The jury stared. The gallery sat in stunned silence. Even the court officers stood still, unsure. The power he once held over the room had vanished. Then Jasmine moved. Slowly, calmly, she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a clean white envelope. On the corner was a dark blue seal, Office of the Inspector General, U.S. Courts. Everyone in the room recognized it. The moment that seal appeared, the air shifted again. He wasn't just being challenged. He was being investigated. Jasmine placed the envelope on the evidence table. "This," she said clearly, "is an official document from the Office of the Inspector General." Her voice was steady, serious. "It confirms a federal investigation into this courtroom, specifically Judge Travers." Travers didn't speak. He looked at the envelope like it might burn through the wood. Jasmine opened it carefully and held up the first page. It was titled, Formal Notice of Investigation, Misconduct in the Judiciary. She read aloud. The judge is under review for abuse of power, interference with legal evidence, and secret meetings with prosecutors and lobbyists. This includes conduct connected to the trial of Eleanor Haynes. The gallery stirred. One juror covered her mouth. Another shifted in his seat. But Jasmine wasn't done. She continued. The investigation already has audio recordings, court file irregularities, and private emails that raise serious concerns. Staff from this courthouse have already been contacted. The Department of Justice has been notified. The case is no longer just about one defendant. It's about how many other people might have been hurt by this courtroom. She placed the pages down next to the photos, the GPS logs, the receipt. The evidence pile was no longer just a defense. It was a map leading straight to corruption. Judge Trevors didn't slam the gavel, didn't say a word, because the robe no longer protected him. And everyone in that room, jury, staff, officers, even the gallery, could feel it. The judge was no longer judging. He was being judged. The weight of the envelope still hung in the air when the color drained from Trevor's face. His jaw clenched, nostrils flaring, eyes darting from the Inspector General's seal to the pile of evidence now stacked neatly before him. His voice came out unsteady, hoarse. "This is outrageous," he stammered, eyes flicking to the court officers, then back to Jasmine. "Judicial immunity applies here. I am a sitting federal judge. I have the full protection of the law. I cannot be investigated like this. Not for my rulings." The words came faster now, as if he was trying to outrun what had already been exposed. "This is a violation of Article 3 authority. I'm protected under the doctrine of judicial independence. This entire display is illegal. He pounded the bench with the flat of his palm, a weak echo of the gavel's former power. "I demand immediate dismissal of these accusations. I demand representation. I demand that this courtroom remember who is in charge." But the room remained still. There was no rescue coming. Not from the clerk, not from the prosecutor, not from the guards, who stood like statues, watching the unraveling. Then Jasmine stepped forward, not quickly, not forcefully, just steadily, like gravity answering panic with purpose. "Judicial immunity," she said, voice firm but controlled, "was never meant to shield criminal behavior. It protects honest rulings, not secret deals, not falsified records, not backroom meetings with federal prosecutors and private lobbyists." Her words hit harder than any objection. They weren't legal theory, they were fact. Cold, plain, undeniable. She continued, "Immunity does not cover threats made to silence court staff. It does not cover the illegal sealing of evidence to protect political allies. It does not cover using the bench as a weapon against those without power. And it certainly does not protect a judge who turns the courtroom into a personal tool for revenge." She took one last step toward the bench. "When a judge becomes the very thing the system was designed to prevent," she said, her voice now quiet but sharper than ever, "then the law is not obligated to protect that robe, because at that point there is no justice left, only the illusion of it." And as the words settled over the room, the illusion began to die. Everyone knew it, even Trevors. The silence that followed Jasmine's statement about judicial limits had an edge to it, sharp, waiting, electric. But she didn't let it settle for long. Without raising her voice, she reached into her case folder once again and retrieved a clear plastic pouch. Inside it, a small black USB drive. No label, just purpose. "Your Honor," she said, walking slowly toward the court technician's desk, "the court has heard argument, testimony, and seen visual documentation, but now it will hear the judge himself." Her tone never wavered, cool, precise, impossible to interrupt. Exhibit D is a recording obtained through a lawful internal audit, dated March 12, 7:14 p.m., from the judge's own chambers. The voice on this file belongs to Judge Malcolm Trevors, addressing his court clerk in private. The technician inserted the drive. The speakers hummed to life. And then, his voice. "This file never existed. You understand me? You delete it tonight. I don't care what's in the system or who asked for it. It goes away. If this leaks, the case falls apart. But more than that, so do you. You'll be out of a job before the weekend. Think about that before making a mistake." A few gasps escaped the gallery. A juror shifted forward. Even Prosecutor Langley's pen stopped mid-stroke. But it wasn't the courtroom that reacted first. It was the woman seated at the clerk's desk, hands trembling in her lap. The room turned toward her just as her shoulders began to shake. Her lips parted, trying to form words, but only breath came. Then the tears followed, quiet at first, then harder. She stood slowly as if it took everything she had to lift herself from the chair. "I didn't want to," she said through tears. "He told me I'd never work again if I didn't erase it. He said he'd ruin my name, that no one would believe me anyway." She covered her mouth, voice cracking. "I thought, if I just followed orders, maybe it would go away. But it didn't. It only got worse." Her voice broke again. "It wasn't just this case," she whispered. "He's done it before. I kept the notes, but I didn't know who to give them to." The audio had stopped. The clerk's sobs had faded. Every piece of evidence, surveillance footage, GPS logs, sworn letters, even the sound of Trevor's threatening to erase justice, now sat in the open like debris after a collapse. The courtroom had become still, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of stillness that comes when a storm has passed and the wreckage stands exposed. The judge's fingers trembled as they gripped the edge of the bench, his eyes locked on the folder in front of him, but seeing nothing. And then all at once he snapped. "I am the law!" Trevor's roared, his voice ripping through the courtroom like a shot. He slammed both fists against the hardwood bench, the crack of impact startling, but not commanding. Not anymore. "This courtroom obeys me. These walls exist because I say they do. You don't come in here and tell me what justice is." His face was red, his breath ragged, chest heaving as though each word cost him oxygen. The gavel clattered to the floor as his arms swept wide in fury. "This is my courtroom." But the eyes around him didn't flinch. No fear, no obedience, just the quiet gaze of people watching a man lose the one thing he had always used to define himself: power. His gaze shifted wildly, first to the jury, who now looked not at a judge, but at a man unraveling. Then to the gallery where reporters sat frozen, pens down, phones no longer hidden. To the officers by the exit, still unmoving, still unreadable. His eyes lingered on Jasmine for a fraction of a second, then flinched away, as if her presence alone scorched what was left of his authority. And then something in him changed. The shouting stopped. His shoulders slumped slightly and his head tilted, not in surrender, but in disorientation. His eyes began to drift, unfocused, glassy, not scanning for control now, but for explanation, as if he were looking for someone to remind him how things had slipped so far. But no one moved, no one answered. The silence in the room was no longer tense. It was final. It wasn't the silence of fear or shock or even satisfaction. It was the silence of recognition. The kind that comes when an entire room realizes, without needing to speak it aloud, that a chapter has ended. Trevor's had ruled this courtroom with arrogance for years, but now the courtroom ruled him with silence. And in that silence, his legacy collapsed, not with a gavel, but with a whisper he no longer controlled. The room had already gone still, but this silence was different, heavier, final. And then, at exactly 11:32 a.m., it broke, not with noise but with movement. Double doors at the rear of the courtroom eased open, not kicked, not slammed, just opened, quietly, deliberately. 4 figures in dark suits stepped through, flanking both sides of the central aisle. Their posture didn't suggest panic or drama. It suggested control. No one needed to ask who they were. The FBI had arrived. They didn't shout. They didn't need to. Every eye in the room turned as the agents moved forward with calm precision, their presence slicing through the tension like a scalpel. Each step echoed in the chamber with eerie clarity. Heels on marble, synchronized like a verdict marching toward the bench. They wore discreet vests under well-cut jackets and holstered sidearms that never had to be drawn. The seal of the Department of Justice gleamed faintly on their clipped badge wallets, which remained visible. Not flashed, not waved, just there. The lead agent, mid-50s, lean, composed, with the expression of someone who had seen this moment play out across 100 rooms, approached the bench. He didn't look angry. He didn't look triumphant. He looked inevitable. Turning slightly so the whole room could hear, he delivered the words with the cold clarity of law. Judge Malcolm Travers, by order of the United States. Department of Justice, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, destruction of federal court records, and conspiracy to subvert judicial proceedings. The courtroom didn't gasp. It exhaled. Travers didn't respond. His mouth twitched, as if searching for a sentence that never came. His hands, once slammed down in fury, now hung limply at his sides. The color in his face had drained to something pale and distant, his eyes darting not with defiance, but with disbelief. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not to him. But it was. The lead agent stepped closer, producing a pair of steel cuffs from his belt. One of the bailiffs, previously frozen in place, now moved instinctively to step aside. There was no resistance, no last-word speech, no dramatic lunge. Just the quiet click of metal locking around wrists that once pointed, with unchecked authority, from the bench. The symbol of law had been removed from behind the bench and was now standing in handcuffs in front of it. The cuffs were locked, but Travers couldn't accept it. The reality hadn't caught up to his ego. As the FBI agents began guiding him away from the bench, his throne, his fortress, he snapped. Not with grace, not with dignity, but with a fury born of disbelief. He yanked against the grip of the agent holding his right arm, twisted his body with a strength that came from panic, not purpose, and turned back toward the courtroom with a face twisted in red desperation. "I have friends in Congress," he bellowed, his voice cracking, raw. "You think this is over? I've made calls from that bench you couldn't begin to understand. You people are playing a dangerous game." His eyes scanned the jury, the press row, the stunned faces in the gallery as if searching for an ally. There were none. "They'll come for you," he warned, now speaking to no one in particular. "You think you've won something? You think this is justice? You'll pay for this. Every last one of you will pay." The courtroom didn't erupt, didn't flinch. It simply watched. Watched a man unravel publicly, a man who had once silenced rooms with a look, now unable to silence even himself. The officers didn't answer. The jury didn't blink. The bailiffs didn't move. The spell was broken, and Travers was the only one who hadn't realized it. But Jasmine had. She didn't react to the outburst. She didn't argue. She didn't shout back. She simply stepped forward, slow, steady, without performance. Her presence had weight, not volume. She looked directly at the man who had spent years hiding behind procedure, weaponizing his position and wearing the robe like armor. And then she spoke. Her voice was low, almost soft, but carried through the courtroom with chilling clarity. "You destroyed yourself a long time ago," she said, her tone stripped of malice, rich with truth. "I didn't bring you down. You did that every time you silenced a witness, buried a case, or bent the rules to protect yourself." She took one more breath, measured, steady. "All I did was shine a light on the darkness you created." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was absolute. The kind of silence that only truth can carve. The agents resumed their motion. Travers didn't speak again, not because he was gagged, but because there was nothing left to say. And as he was led out of the courtroom he once ruled, the sound of his own footsteps, no longer echoed by fear, was the only thing left trailing behind him. As Judge Travers was escorted through the narrow corridor behind courtroom 4A, his steps unsteady, face pale and slack with disbelief, he had no idea the fall he triggered wasn't his alone. The rot had run deeper, and the system had been quietly preparing for this hour. At exactly 11:32 a.m. Eastern Time, just as the steel cuffs locked around Travers' wrists in Washington, the same silence fell in 7 other federal courthouses across the nation. not from fear, but from revelation. In each one, doors opened without warning. Armed agents entered with sealed warrants. Gag orders were in place. Each move rehearsed, each target tracked to the minute. In Columbus, Ohio, Judge Marion Kent was pulled from her chambers in the middle of reviewing a case file. Her clerk tried to speak, but the agent already had the badge out. Federal warrant. Step away from the desk. In Phoenix, Judge Richard Eldridge was taken straight from the jet bridge after returning from a judicial conference in Aspen. His suitcase contained unfiled sealed documents that later matched names found on Trevor's encrypted communications. In Atlanta, Judge Paul Whitmore, whose rulings had mysteriously favored the same 3 corporate defendants across 2 years, was removed from the bench in front of a half-filled courtroom. He never saw it coming. The moment he turned to issue a ruling, he was met by 2 agents walking up the center aisle. The courtroom fell into stunned silence as the judge, the man behind the robe, stood but didn't run. He simply asked, "Is this public?" before being told, "It will be in 20 minutes. In Dallas, Pittsburgh, Flagstaff, and Savannah, the scenes varied slightly, but the result was the same. The illusion of untouchable power shattered, quietly, precisely, and without warning. The operation had been planned with military precision under the codename Black Robe. Led by the Department of Justice's Internal Corruption Division, it tracked encrypted communications, travel records, sealed file patterns, and unusual dismissal trends across dozens of jurisdictions. It wasn't just about favors or phone calls. It was about intentional sabotage of the justice system by those sworn to protect it. Many of the judges had been under silent observation for months. Jasmine's courtroom had become the spark, but the fire had been building. The final go order had come just 72 hours earlier, once Trevor's voice was confirmed on the tape ordering the deletion of federal records. The connection between him and the others, once whispered in legal circles, was now written into federal affidavits. Back in Washington, the courtroom gallery lit up, not with chaos, but with real-time awareness. Phones vibrated, news alerts popped, screens flashed with breaking headlines. 7 federal judges arrested in DOJ sweep tied to judicial conspiracy. Coordinated raids uncover widespread evidence tampering. DOJ targets shadow network of rogue federal judges. No one clapped. No one cheered. They just watched. Because everyone in that room understood, this wasn't just a corruption case. This was an eruption of something long buried. And though Trevor's had been the face of the arrogance, the robe, the rage, he was never the whole machine. Now, one by one, the machine was being dismantled. Quietly, swiftly, permanently. The dust from the arrests hadn't even settled when, the following morning, the final chapter in Eleanor Haynes's story reached its long-awaited conclusion. It wasn't splashed across breaking news banners or shouted by reporters. It happened quietly, but with the weight of justice finally restored. The courtroom was different now, lighter somehow, cleaner. The stain of Trevor's arrogance had been scrubbed away, physically and symbolically. A new judge now presided, one who had no ties to the old network, no interest in spectacle. He had reviewed the evidence with fresh eyes, evidence that had once been buried under sealed orders and threats. Jasmine stood beside Eleanor at the defense table, her expression unreadable, but her eyes locked on the bench. Then came the words, "Mrs. Haynes, on all charges of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction, this court finds you not guilty." There was no applause, no cheers, just a silence that felt like a held breath, finally being released after months of suffocation. Eleanor didn't speak. Her eyes welled, but no tears fell. She simply closed them, shoulders rising slowly with one long breath, as if letting go of a weight no one else could see. The courtroom had once been a place where she was vilified. Today it became the place where she was restored. The judge offered no flourish in his ruling, only a brief, respectful nod and an acknowledgement that no further legal action would be taken against her. Her case was dismissed with prejudice. It could never be brought again. But what came next was the part that no court could manufacture. When Eleanor stepped outside, blinking into the sunlight, the courthouse steps were filled, not with media chaos, but with life. Dozens of women she had once helped, through shelters, job programs, and late-night crisis calls, stood waiting. Many held signs in hand, others brought flowers. Some simply stood there, hands over hearts, tears in their eyes. It wasn't a protest, it was a homecoming. One young woman stepped forward first. "You gave me a place to sleep when I had nowhere to go," she said, her voice shaking. "And now, we're here to hold you up like you held all of us." Others followed, some with children by their sides, some with walking sticks, some dressed in the very uniforms Eleanor's charity had helped provide through employment re-entry programs. The crowd parted for her, and Eleanor, still in the same conservative suit she had worn since the trial began, walked slowly down the steps. Jasmine stayed a step behind, not to lead, but to support. Microphones were pushed forward, cameras snapped rapidly, but Eleanor didn't stop for the press. She stopped for the people. "I'm not going back to how things were," she said softly, "because I'm going forward, stronger." And then something extraordinary happened. The women formed a circle around her, not to block her, not to shield her, but to walk with her, shoulder to shoulder. The community that once watched her be torn down now refused to let her walk alone. Jasmine followed quietly, her face calm, her expression unreadable to the press. But behind her eyes there was something deeper. The knowledge that truth, no matter how long it takes, can still win. And in that moment, justice didn't look like a gavel or a judge's robe. It looked like a woman walking back into the world she helped heal, with the people she saved now standing guard over her freedom. While the nation reeled from the collapse of a judicial empire, and Eleanor Haynes was welcomed back by the very people she once rescued, Jasmine Crockett vanished from the story, not to hide, not out of fear, but because her job was never about fame. While networks scrambled to book her for exclusives, and morning shows opened with graphics calling her the woman who toppled the robes, she turned off her phone, closed her briefcase, and slipped out of the city before sunrise. She didn't go to Washington. She didn't go home. She went south. 2 days later, on a quiet gravel road outside Lynchburg, Virginia, Jasmine walked into a courtroom without microphones, without media, and without a single person recognizing her name. The only camera in the building was broken. The flag in the corner hung limp above a dusty file cabinet, and the man sitting across from her, Clarence Rayburn, 62, a retired Army mechanic with 3 herniated discs and a Bronze Star in a shoebox, could barely meet her eyes. He had been fighting for months to stop a forced foreclosure on the house he'd lived in since 1980. The house he built onto with his own hands. The house where he buried his wife's dog beneath the oak tree and hung every grandchild's Christmas ornament with a thumbtack into old pine wood panels. The foreclosure order cited chronic code violations, but none of them made sense. Peeling paint, a cracked step, leaves in a gutter. Then came the letter from the city. The home was within a redevelopment zone. Clarence was not. Jasmine sat across from him in the tiny office of a local legal aid clinic, files spread out across a scratched folding table. Her voice never rose. Her hands moved with precision. She flipped through building code citations, then cross-referenced the city council voting records. Her eyes narrowed. The same board member who authorized the code enforcements had direct investments in a corporate redevelopment group bidding for Clarence's entire block. She didn't curse. She didn't smile. She just said, "They tried to make it look clean, but it's dirty." Clarence looked up for the first time. "I'm just tired, ma'am," he said, the edges of his voice roughened by years of diesel fumes and quiet defeats. "I served my country. I paid off that house. Now they're saying I'm in the way." "You're not!" She rose from her chair, her blazer wrinkled from travel, her hair pulled back in a simple twist. She looked nothing like the legal warrior from the headlines. There were no aides, no cameras, no applause. And yet in that moment, she stood taller than she ever had behind a podium. "I'm filing an emergency injunction this afternoon," she said. "Then we bring in the council records, the developer documents, and subpoena the zoning committee. We push this back into the daylight." Clarence blinked. "They said no one would fight this hard for me. They were wrong." And as the fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead and rain tapped the courthouse windows, Jasmine Crockett began another quiet war against the next quiet injustice. No fanfare, no stage, just a veteran, a home, and one woman who still believed the law could be a sword, not just a shield. While Jasmine Crockett moved with urgency, cutting through layers of deceit, demanding accountability in real time, history offers a chilling reminder of what happens when no one dares to move at all. The corruption she exposed in a matter of weeks echoed something very real, something that once festered for nearly 10 years behind the mahogany walls of a courtroom in New Orleans. The name was Thomas Porteous, a federal judge whose seat on the bench came with lifetime tenure, prestige, and virtually untouchable power. But behind the title was a man neck-deep in judicial rot. He accepted envelopes of cash from lawyers who appeared before him, took extravagant meals, hotel stays, and under-the-table deals from bail bondsmen and defense attorneys, filed for bankruptcy under a false name to hide his assets, and ruled in favor of those who paid him, not in theory, but in practice. The signs were there. The FBI opened an investigation in 2002. Witnesses whispered. Attorneys raised eyebrows. Journalists hinted, but no one stepped forward. Why? Because unlike in Jasmine's courtroom, the system around Porteous wasn't broken. It was complicit through inaction. His fellow judges remained silent. Prosecutors delayed, and the people who worked within the court knew that to speak out was to commit career suicide. For 8 years, Porteous remained on the bench, rendering decisions in federal cases, divorce settlements, corporate litigation, criminal appeals, while the ethics violations piled up behind closed doors. A judicial complaint was finally escalated in 2007. Congress initiated proceedings in 2008. He was formally impeached by the House in 2010, becoming only the 8th federal judge in U.S. history to be removed from office by the Senate. But by then, the damage was irreversible. Dozens of rulings were thrown into question. Litigants who had trusted the federal process were left with no recourse. And perhaps worst of all, the silence that protected Porteous had sent a message to the public that corruption could sit in a black robe, sign legal orders, and walk into court every morning without consequence if the machine chose to look the other way. That is the world Jasmine refused to accept. She didn't wait for committees. She didn't wait for the media to catch on. She didn't wait until it was politically safe. She followed the evidence, exposed it under oath, and stood in the line of fire, knowing full well that challenging a federal judge meant risking not just professional backlash, but personal destruction. And she did it anyway, because history had already shown what delay looks like. It looks like a decade of quiet corruption, rotting a system from the inside out while decent people wait for someone else to act. Porteous may be gone from the bench, but his shadow still lingers, in sealed records, in unanswered questions, and in the lives of those he harmed. Jasmine's stand wasn't just justice, it was a warning that in a system built to protect power, silence is the most dangerous ally corruption has. And the only thing more powerful than that silence is the moment someone breaks it. And in the wake of history's silence and the ghosts of too many closed doors, Jasmine Crockett became more than a defense attorney. She became a living symbol of principled resistance, not in the way statues are built or streets renamed, but in the quiet, dangerous, high-stakes space where real justice lives or dies, the courtroom. In the face of power sharpened into cruelty, she didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stood, and that alone changed everything. She didn't ask for the moment. She walked into it, fully aware that confronting a federal judge wasn't just professionally risky, it was personally perilous. But she also knew the cost of silence, knew how the system had been designed to outlast outrage, to drown dissent in procedure and bureaucracy. And still she stood, unbending, unshaken, undeniable. In that moment, she echoed the spirit of Rosa Parks, not through slogans or marches, but through presence. Parks didn't start a revolution by shouting. She did it by refusing to move. Jasmine didn't ignite justice by storming the court. She did it by refusing to back down when the law itself was being twisted by the very man sworn to uphold it. But the setting had changed. This time it wasn't a bus seat in Montgomery. It was a bench in a federal court, where a black woman dared to challenge the very architecture of judicial abuse. She didn't just sit in defiance, she stood in defiance. stood against centuries of expectation, stood against the condescension coded into every phrase hurled at her by Judge Trevors, stood in the face of a courtroom where everything, from the language to the hierarchy, was designed to make her feel like she didn't belong. And still, she commanded the space like it was built for her. The impact wasn't immediate headlines or political praise. It was something far more powerful. The realization, etched into the memory of everyone who saw it, that justice is not polite, it is not passive, and it is not always sanctioned by those in power. Sometimes, justice arrives in the form of a black woman standing calm in the storm, refusing to let the truth be buried under robes and rulings. And in doing so, Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a case. She redefined what courage looks like in the 21st century. Not a symbol, a force. A Rosa Parks with legal filings and a voice steady enough to rattle the bones of a corrupted system. All the arrests, trials, and revelations had laid bare a fundamental truth. A single, unwavering stand can dismantle an empire of silence. And yet, when the dust settled and the gavel finally fell, there remained a deeper question, one that stretched far beyond Judge Trevors, beyond the network of corrupt officials, and even beyond Jasmine's unstoppable resolve. What, at the end of all this, was the human lesson to be carried forward? What moral light could guide others through future storms, ensuring that the sacrifices made in this battle would not be forgotten? That was the final piece of the story, the message of resilience and courage, drawn from every risk taken, every truth exposed, and every quiet voice that refused to be silenced. In a world where injustice often feels monolithic, this entire saga served as a profound reminder that a system, no matter how entrenched, can still be confronted. The downfall of Judge Trevors was not just the collapse of one man's tyranny, it was the demonstration that even the loftiest pillars can be brought down by those willing to stand firm. True, the corruption had thrived under layers of bureaucracy, hidden behind carefully sealed documents and the threat of retaliation. But once those walls began to crack, once the first sliver of light broke through the darkness, the entire network collapsed in on itself. That collapse was not swift by default. It became swift because brave individuals refused to blink. Clerks who wept at what they had done, community members who showed up at the courthouse, and attorneys like Jasmine who fought not for vanity, but for principle, all converged to strip power from those who misused it. The lesson was resounding. When voices unite against injustice, the illusions of invincibility crumble. Power relies on fear to maintain its grip, and the moment fear is overshadowed by truth, that power begins to fracture. In that fracture lies the first real sign of hope. Eleanor Haynes, who emerged from her trial exonerated, embodied another aspect of this story, the resilience of ordinary people who find themselves trapped in extraordinary cruelty. Her ordeal underscored how institutions can prey upon the very individuals they claim to protect. She, a quiet nurse turned activist, became a symbol of how easily good intentions can be twisted into allegations when the powerful manipulate the narrative. But the moment her innocence was validated, her entire community rallied back to her side. That outpouring was a clear counterpoint to the cynicism of Trevor's courtroom. Human solidarity, awakened by shared empathy, can indeed overcome entrenched bureaucracy. Eleanor stood not merely as a victim, but as a testament to the principle that no life dedicated to service should be tarnished by the failings of a rigged system. Her story posed a question to every witness. How many Eleanors might exist, hidden in files, threatened into silence, waiting for someone to champion their cause? And by championing even one such story, an entire tide of injustice could be turned. Through Eleanor, the narrative crystallized into a raw, human lesson. Compassion can be a potent shield against unchecked authority. Yet for all the visible drama, the arrests, the simultaneous raids, the televised images of judges taken into custody, there was another battle waged in hushed corners, behind closed doors where influence is bartered like currency. That quieter war was fought in the hearts and minds of those who felt powerless, from low-level clerks to community volunteers. When Jasmine stepped into that courtroom, she was, in essence, telling every hesitant onlooker that passivity is an accomplice to corruption. This moral stance resonates far beyond the legal realm. It reverberates in any place where authority is misused. Fear can be a potent muzzle, but the moment even one person dares to question that fear, a chain reaction of moral awakening can occur. Courage, therefore, becomes contagious. The lesson is straightforward yet profound. Injustice flourishes in silence. Refusing to look away can be dangerous, but looking away is what allows the danger to thrive. The parallels drawn to real-world events, such as the near decade of inaction in the case of Judge Thomas Porteous, offered a dire warning. In that historical example, the system's inertia enabled corruption to entrench itself until the damage reached an almost irreversible point. That cautionary tale underscored one message repeatedly emphasized in Jasmine's narrative. Waiting for a perfect time to speak up is how injustice metastasizes. When no one is willing to risk stepping forward, institutional rot festers until it becomes too massive to ignore. It was precisely that sense of inevitability, that creeping acceptance of "it's just how things work," which allowed the Trevor's network to operate without scrutiny for so long. Jasmine's refusal to wait 10 years, her refusal to be intimidated by a title or threatened by a gavel, stood in sharp contrast to the silence that once shielded Porteous. The underlying principle was that a single, determined individual, armed with facts and unwavering conviction, can outmaneuver even the most labyrinthine systems. This perspective didn't minimize the danger. Trevor's wielded immense power, but it showcased how quickly that power can erode when confronted with moral clarity. Moreover, this entire saga reaffirmed the timeless truth that power unchecked is power abused. Judge Trevor's embodied the arrogance that arises when a role meant for guardianship morphs into a platform for personal gain. The robe became his shield, his guise of legitimacy, and the fear he instilled in others was his greatest weapon. But once that shield cracked, the insecurities and desperation beneath were laid bare. This revelation spoke to the broader human lesson. Those who project the greatest intimidation often harbor the weakest moral footing. Their force is sustained by others' submission, not by true authority. By standing firm, Jasmine dismantled the illusion that a single robe or a single bench could dictate reality without consequence. Trevor's learned the hard way that titles cannot protect those who betray their sworn duty. And in that learning, a system that once seemed impenetrable gained something it desperately needed: accountability. From a broader lens, the events highlighted how the collective can triumph once empowered individuals unite. The FBI raids that took down the network of corrupt judges were choreographed with precision, but they were made possible because people within the system, clerks, staffers, honest officials, provided the essential pieces of the puzzle. Disjointed whispers became an unstoppable force when channeled through a determined advocate like Jasmine. Each new revelation acted like a spark, igniting further disclosures until the blaze of truth burned too hot for any cover-up to contain. That synergy illuminated another core lesson. In oppressive environments, the choice to speak out can feel solitary, but it rarely remains so. Courage begets courage, and truth, once revealed, spreads beyond the control of those who tried to bury it. The collapse of Trevor's and his counterparts wasn't orchestrated by one hero alone, but by an unspoken alliance of individuals who, collectively, decided they would no longer participate in a lie. Jasmine's role as a modern-day Rosa Parks in the courtroom also offered a nuanced look at how activism evolves. In the civil rights era, refusing to give up a bus seat served as a lightning rod for conscience. Here in the domain of federal law, refusing to accept a judge's intimidation performed a similar function. Both acts were seemingly simple in concept, one a quiet posture, the other a calm recitation of legal facts. Yet each shattered the complacency that allowed injustice to masquerade as normalcy. It was a testament to how powerful a single act of refusal can be in dismantling systemic abuse. The moral resonates across generations. Oppression, once challenged, reveals its vulnerabilities. A system built to oppress thrives on the assumption that nobody will challenge it. The moment that assumption fails, cracks appear. Through Jasmine, the narrative hammered home a universal lesson. Sometimes the greatest act of resistance is not aggression, but unwavering resolve. Eleanor Haynes's story layered another human truth on top, that countless individuals remain vulnerable to the whims of authorities. Whether it's an elderly nurse wrongfully accused or a homeless mother targeted by discriminatory policies, the pattern repeats wherever those in power can exploit ignorance or fear. But Eleanor's exoneration showcased that once a victim finds an ally, a voice that wields both compassion and competence, the entire dynamic can shift. There is a profound lesson in how her redemption hinged on the intersection of community support and legal advocacy. Had she been alone, Travers might have succeeded in painting her as a fraud, burying her case under piles of doctored documents and sealed files. Instead, her courage to stand firm, combined with Jasmine's legal resolve, overturned the narrative. This underscored how essential it is to defend the marginalized, not from a place of paternalistic charity, but from a recognition that an attack on one innocent person is a threat to all. In the aftermath, the quiet humility of Jasmine's departure to help a wronged veteran reminded observers that justice is not a spotlight, but a continuum. She could have basked in the glow of public adoration, turned her victory into a personal brand, or leveraged it for higher office. Instead, she slipped away to a place without cameras and set her sights on the next injustice. That decision speaks volumes about the essence of true leadership. It is not fueled by applause, it is sustained by principle. The high drama of Trevor's fall would have made for a triumphant victory lap on national news, but Jasmine understood that the system's cracks remain widespread. There are more Clarence Rayburns out there, people whose lives rest on the precarious edge of bureaucratic malfeasance. A single high-profile takedown can spark hope, but enduring change requires relentless pursuit of the next fight. By choosing to return to the trenches, Jasmine underscored the lesson that justice is never a one-time event, but an ongoing stance. Drawing on these threads, the moral tapestry becomes clearer. Individuals have far more power against injustice than they often realize, and institutions, no matter how imposing, can be held accountable by those who dare to demand it. True, the stakes are high. Careers can be lost, reputations can be smeared, lives can be upended. Yet the story of Jasmine, Eleanor, and the collapse of Trevor's judicial conspiracy shows that complacency is even costlier. When good people assume that stepping forward is someone else's job, corruption flourishes unchecked, and entire communities suffer in its wake. But when even a handful of people decide that they will no longer enable the lie, a chain reaction begins, one that can topple the mightiest structures of deception. The vulnerability of a system built on secrets lies in the fragility of its silence. And once that silence is broken, there is no going back. At the core, there remains a stark commentary on power and responsibility. The robe, once a symbol of noble duty, became twisted into an emblem of absolute rule under Travers. This distortion is a reminder that symbols mean nothing without the moral actions of those who wear them. A judge, a uniformed officer, a legislator. These titles imply public trust, but trust can be weaponized if no one questions the integrity behind it. Jasmine's confrontation served as a litmus test for a system that often shields its own. The fact that she succeeded despite the odds points to a vital truth. The law, when wielded ethically, can uproot the very pillars of corruption. However, it also depends on the moral courage of individuals to enforce it. Paper rules alone cannot stand against greed or intimidation. They need voices. They need hearts. They need people willing to say, "No more," and back that conviction with action. In many ways, the downfall of Travers and the liberation of innocents like Eleanor mirror a timeless narrative, that of an underdog army breaching the walls of a towering fortress. The fortress, of course, is the complacent system that believes itself invulnerable. The underdog army consists of those marginalized or disregarded by that same system, galvanized by a champion who refuses to accept a rigged verdict. The struggle is epic because it touches on fundamental questions of justice, power, and moral worth. Yet this epic doesn't hinge on superpowers or dramatic showdowns. It unfolds in the quiet revelation of documents, the unwavering testimony of those once silenced, and the steadfast refusal of an attorney to cower in front of a corrupt gavel. Victory, in the end, isn't about crushing the enemy, but restoring the dignity of those who were robbed of it. That is what made the entire arc both thrilling and deeply human. It resonated with every person who has ever felt powerless in the face of systemic might. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.